So as we get started, you'll see that this webinar is co-presented with myself and Catherine Newington from the Australian Computer Society. Catherine and I decided we didn't want to dedicate slides to our bios, but you can read about us in the event description from the booking page and in your emails from us. So I think we'll just get started. Catherine, did you want to just explain about Minty as well?
Yeah, so up the top there is, we do have some interactive aspects of this webinar just to kind of keep you on your toes. So if you go to minty.com and then you put in the 6-digit code, which is 388742, there's a couple of questions and things that we just want to get your participation in, just so you're not just sitting there and listening to information. It's all processing. All the answers, they're not related to your registration as well, so they're completely anonymous as well.
Great. So here's the agenda, what we want to try and get through today. We want to start with a little bit of about the Digitech curriculum, and one of the often things that comes up about what's the difference between Digitech and just ICT. Then we're going to look at 3 sort of domains that are related to maths and numeracy. So we'll look at algorithms and how algorithms are now actually quite a part of the mathematics curriculum, at least in Victoria, geometry and data. And then, as I said, time for some questions at the end. Now, those of you who attended a previous webinar with us, you may have seen this bit at the beginning. It's something we've already done, but we like to just do this at the start. And what is digital technologies? What is when we talk about that as a subject? And one of the main things to say is that it's not just ICT. And ICT as a general capability is really about consuming technology, using it safely and effectively, using it to create maybe movies or documents or things like that for your everyday life and for your schoolwork. And it is, in the Australian curriculum, ICT is regarded as a general capability that's across the whole curriculum. Whereas in Victoria, it's not even that. It's just explicitly integrated into content descriptions in each subject. So for example, in maths, you'll often see use ICT to do da, 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 da. Or in English, you might see use ICT, and that's because it's been actually embedded in there. So digital technologies, on the other hand, is a specific learning area for F to 10. It is more about what's under the hood. It's more about how we actually create solutions that involve maybe coding or data or computer systems. So it's more like what you might call a computer science sort of course. So the kind of concepts that we do in digital technologies, we'll be having a quick look at the Victorian curriculum during this session. But yeah, it's more of what's under the hood and more about making rather than just using. All right. There's a couple of resources there. Obviously, we don't expect you to type in these long URLs if you don't want to, but VCAR has a couple of posters that are quite good that help you distinguish between ICT and digital technologies. And on the Digital Technologies Hub, which is the Australian curriculum, they also have a poster there. And the ACA, the Australian Computing Academy, they have this activity that you might be able to do with the other teachers in your staff room to help them sort of distinguish between things that are ICT that everyone should be doing in their classes and things that are specific to the digital technologies curriculum. So when we look at Australia versus Victoria, we're quite lucky in Victoria in the sense that our content descriptors are almost identical to the Australian ones. There's just a couple of minor changes. What's really different is the way the structure is done. In the Australian curriculum, it's structured under 2 strands, one of knowledge and one of processes, whereas in Victoria, it's structured more under topics, and there's 3 kind of main topics in the Victorian one. So if you find Australian digital technologies resources, you can fairly easily translate those into where they belong in the Victorian curriculum. So let's dip our toes in, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take over the control for a moment, and we're just going to have a quick look at the Digitech curriculum. And that link, if you use that link, it will take you to a sort of a filtered view of the VCAR Victorian curriculum page that looks like this. I've left out the level descriptions. I've just put in the content descriptors. But what we can see here is the levels going from F2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then across. So Catherine and I thought it would be useful to talk a little bit about how the curriculum flows from left to right by picking on one of the content descriptors and how it moves across. So I think, Catherine, did you want to talk about the one of the ones out of creating digital solutions?
Yeah, absolutely. So the one thing that I like about the Victorian curriculum, and this will also be the Australian one as well, is that it's a really lovely continuum. So this is really useful for primary school teachers or anyone if you swap between year levels. So you can see that there's a continuous learning progression for our students. And it means that as soon as you move from one level to another, you can either use that knowledge and take it down with you, or use that knowledge and take it up with you and build on what they've previously learned. So if we take a look at, the sequence of steps. In our foundation to year 2, we're looking at following a sequence of steps and decisions needed to solve a problem. And it's really just step by step, just basic instructions that they need to describe and follow. Then we go up to our 3-4, and then we're looking at defining the problems, but now we're also including within that sequence of steps, branching and user input. Then they also start to bring in some simple solutions as visual programming, and that's where you might start to introduce block coding and a platform such as Scratch as well. Then as we move up into 5-6, we're still defining that we start to define the terms data, and then now we're also designing designing, modify, and following simple algorithms. We can also then start to represent them I can never remember that word, diagrammatically, and in English. And then it's also then again, we're looking at branching and iteration. So you can see there that there is a nice little continuous with their learning with that one. Then again, we're starting to then go back and look at develop the simple solutions as visual programs.
So if we then continue on to the secondary years, so I'm just going to kind of slide across, and we look at 7 and 8, we can see here that we're now designing algorithms, again, diagrammatically. So I'm just letting someone in here. Diagrammatically, as well as in English, tracing those algorithms, so trying to predict what they do before we even start coding them. And then the developing stage, one of the big changes you see here is general purpose programming language. So we're starting to move away from just blocky code, just visual code, and moving more towards languages like Python and JavaScript. And then lastly, in the last one here, 9 and 10, now it's starting to get a little bit more formalized, a bit more sophisticated. So we're designing our algorithms structured English, which is usually interpreted as something like pseudocode. We're talking about things like validating our algorithms. And then when we develop, we start using data structures and object-oriented language. So everything starts to get a little bit more sophisticated. But you can see how we've kind of traced through just one or two of these content descriptors and how they kind of evolve from F to 2 all the way up to 9 and 10. I'll hand back over to the presentation there, Catherine.
So now we're going to be using Minty Meter. And if you haven't popped on yet, just go on to minty.com and pop in the code 388742 and answer one of these questions. So you've got, how is digital technologies as a learning area taught at your school? So you've got not taught explicitly, homeroom teachers do it in primary school setting, it's a specialist timetable class in primary, might be a specialist timetable class as a secondary, or it's integrated into a STEM program that's either for primary school or high school. And you can see our little answers coming through where we've got our little blue dots that are coming on the screen.
Since
you can use up to 3 questions as well, or 3 options that suit your school.
We thought, since we're going to be talking about data later, we didn't want to just do a boring old column chart. So the Mentimeter lets us do these cool little dots, which is kind of a different way of seeing the volume. So we'll just wait another minute for that if anyone still has to put in theirs.
seems to be the classroom teachers in primary school seems to be getting.
Yeah, it's interesting because we often hear from primary schools where there's a specialist class for it.
Yeah,
So,
I've come across that there are, oh, here we go. There's another one in the specialist timetabled class. I think a lot more primary schools are going down that path. It's a very interesting conversation around whether to go down and have a specialist class or to already embed it into what you might be doing in the classroom.
just another 20 seconds and then we'll move on. All right, algorithms. For those of you who maybe this is a new term for you, some people will be very familiar with this term. For some people, it'll be a new term. I've given a couple of examples that are a bit out of the box here because we often sort of get obsessed with computer code when we talk about algorithms. But these two examples I've got here, one is music. And in many ways, music is an algorithm. You're following a sort of a code. You're following a set of steps. They proceed from, in music's case, from left to right. There are all sorts of special commands or codes to tell you how things need to be done. Music can also have repeats or iteration where you go back and redo part of the music. Music can even have conditions. If it's the first time I've done this bit, go back to here. But if it's the second time, go to a different place. So music is very much like an algorithm in the sense that you're following a procedure. And the same with a cheesecake recipe or any kind of recipe, really. Once again, you're following a set of steps that you do from front to end. You might jump around a bit if you're experienced, but if you're like me, you don't, because otherwise you end up with, in my case, pork pancakes recently. That was terrible. So following the recipe, and again, you can have repeats. You can have something like a function where you might say, if you want to make Vegemite sandwiches, then you do the same things, but put in Vegemite. If you want to make jam sandwiches, do the same steps, but this time put in jam. So these are both examples of an algorithm, a procedure, or a set of steps that we follow in order to accomplish our solution. And this is the definition. One of the things that is really interesting is that in Victoria, the mathematics curriculum now has a content descriptor in each single level, which is all about algorithmic thinking. And in the glossary for the Victorian Maths curriculum, you can see this quote, and they give a few examples of mathematical algorithms or processes that you might do in the maths classroom. So ordering a set of numbers or multiplying numbers, right up to bisecting an angle, factorizing, all those sorts of exercises that you do or procedures that you do in maths. So just like we did with the Victorian, we're going to have a quick dip into the maths curriculum. And once again, if you were to follow that little bit.ly link, that will take you to a filtered version again of the maths curriculum, just so that we can show you where these appear in that curriculum on the VCAR page. So once again, I'll just bring that up and we can have a quick look. So hopefully you're seeing now Victorian curriculum page for mathematics. And again, we've got F through to 10 going from left to right. Now, where are these supposed algorithmic thinking content descriptions? Well, they all fall within patterns and algebra in the maths curriculum. And you'll find that there's one in each year level. So this first one here, follow a short sequence of instructions. That's in the F. In the next year level, recognize the importance of repetition of a process. So there's one in each. They don't always use the word algorithm, but there's one in each. Here we've got applying repetition in arithmetic operations. If we keep going across, level 3, we've got using a function machine in level 4. Now, where's the one here? Oh yes, define a simple class of problems and solve them using an effective algorithm that involves a short sequence of steps. So you can see they go all the way up. And we were surprised, I wasn't aware of this, but at year 10, they go as far as to talk about a general purpose programming language. So actually almost linking in with the kind of work that students would be doing in digital technologies. All right. Coming back to the presentation now. What's great about algorithms? I mean, why is it such a useful thing to be able to teach? And I just wanted to put this slide in just because it really is one of those tools that we can have students doing that strategy and process where they try and fail. They get some fairly quick feedback when they write code or when they do this sort of exercise. And so it's a great way for that sort of teaching that resilience and that sort of trying strategies and seeing if they work. That's why I've got the picture there of Edison's light bulb, the famous story that he did it like 100 times before getting it right. Also, it encourages them to evaluate their design at the end and be able to see how efficient was it, how useful was it, and or how adaptable. We sometimes talk about elegance. How elegant was my code? You know, how innovative.
So as a primary school example, especially if you're just starting out with algorithmic thinking and you want to embed it into your numeracy, is take a look at how you're teaching equations as well. And one of these ones is when you're looking at strategies with addition and subtraction and other equations that you're doing, think about getting your students to actually talk about the strategies that they can use to solve a simple 2-digit problem like the one that we have on the screen that we can see. And you can ask simple questions like, once they've solved it one way, what's another way, another process that they could use to solve it as well? How could they set out their work, looking at the most efficient way that they've solved it as well? I'm always quite strategic when I'm creating equations like this. So you'll notice that this particular one, what I would want students to be looking for and types of strategies to be using in their steps is the number factor to 10. So you can see that I've strategically picked 4 plus 6 as one of those ones if I was really focusing on, say, number facts to 10. Something else that you could do is when you are writing and you want them to get thinking about these strategies and processes, is actually to write the answer on the board, because I find a lot of students just go quickly to the answer without actually getting them to think about the strategies that they've been using. So then you say that this particular one, this is the answer. How would you get that same answer? It then allows them to take their time to think about the different type of strategies. And if you've got those quick thinkers in your class, again, you can ask them to find a different way to solve that equation. And then again, talking about which one's effective. Another one that you can do is actually think about open-ended activities as well. So if we gave any student the problem, the answer is 36, create a step-by-step strategy to reach this answer. That's another way that you can start introducing that thinking through an open-ended activity. One thing that I found whenever I did an activity like that is that I had to put restrictions on it beforehand. So you'd get those quick thinking mathematicians in the classroom would always do really simple ones like 35 plus 1, and then they do 34 plus 2. And so they do really basic ones. So I would always put in the restriction that you couldn't have a 2-digit number, just a simple addition with a 1-digit number. Again, you're going to be making multiple strategies, and then you can talk about which of the strategies that they've created is the most efficient strategy for them. And also not just the most efficient, but the way that they like to solve it as well. When I was teaching a grade 5-6 class, when we were looking at BODMAS, instead of just giving them the BODMAS equation and almost them having to learn that process, we actually took maybe 1 or 2 sessions out of it to evaluate the BODMAS, the processes that we use. And one of the questions that I put towards the students was, can you find any other ways and other processes that gets you to the same answer that the processes like BODMAS would use? It allows them to really think about what they're doing in that BODMAS process and why it's important. When I did those couple of lessons, what I found is within that little time period that I had and I was teaching BODMAS, what I used to have as students kind of questioning to then a further deeper understanding of why those processes exist for BODMAS.
For the secondary example, I thought I'd do a bit of a little hands-on thing just to sort of show you something that you could do. And this one is about barcodes. you may be aware that barcodes have a checksum. That is the last digit, so the digit 3 at the end of this barcode for the cherry tomatoes, that last digit is actually not really part of the code. It's just there so that the computer can calculate and make sure that the other numbers were all scanned correctly. So it's called a checksum because you're sort of doing some summing and timesing and minusing, doing some maths in order to get that 3 and say, all right, that means all those other digits were correctly scanned. And this is why barcodes very rarely fail by giving you the wrong product. When you do your self-checkout at the supermarket, they tend to either fail completely because the barcode just couldn't be read, or you scan the wrong one, or you get it right. But you very rarely scan cherry tomatoes and get something else unless it was in the database wrong. So here's a little algorithm for how that actually works. And this is from a lesson plan at the website CS Unplugged, Computer Science Unplugged. It's a New Zealand resource. It's great. It's full of activities that that you can do without needing technology. So you can do them on paper. But we are going to actually make up an algorithm out of this. And this is the algorithm that you can see. It's been done as a neat little picture there rather than a flow chart. It's been sort of done as a diagram. And there's a sample barcode at the top there. And you can see the numbers 9400 and so on. The last digit, the green one, is the one that we're going to figure out. That's the one that we want to know. That will tell us if the barcode's scanned correctly. So how do we do this? Well, first of all, our program, we might say, okay, user, enter in the full barcode, including the green one, and we're going to work out whether or not you actually did get that right. Okay, next step. So all those orange digits at the top, we're going to start by summing all of those. As you can see in the operate bit there, we sum all those orange digits and we end up with the number 29 in this case. And the actual orange digit that we want is that 9, that sort of bright yellow 9 there. And we're going to do the same with the blue ones. So on the next slide, now we do all the blue ones. So the 4, 0, 4, 0, 9, and 7, those all get added up, sum those up, and then we take the second digit out of that, which is the 4. And we keep going. So that 3 is just a literal. It just comes out of nowhere. You always use 3, the one that's purple there. So to get the pink, the 12, we go 3 times 4. We get that pink digit. Then to get the brown digit, we take the pink one and the orange one. We add them together. And once again, the last digit gives us that brown digit. And finally, to get the green number, we just do the maths there, 10 minus that brown one. And in the end, we'll get our number. And in this case, the number will come out to whatever that green box is, which is 9. We check that 9 against the full barcode that was entered, and we figure out, okay, did it get scanned correctly or not? So what I've done on the left-hand side there is something called pseudocode. And it's a structured English that we, as programmers, we use this sort of planning code or design code before we actually, sometimes before we start coding for real in our Python or our JavaScript or whatever language we're using. In this case, we could also use Scratch. So on the next slide, I've got links there to the implementation of this either in Scratch or in Python. Now, of course, in the secondary years, we're moving on from languages like Scratch, and we're moving on towards general purpose languages like Python for the Digitech curriculum. But I will just quickly show you the Python version. I'll just take over for a moment, just so you can see how it works once it's implemented. So you should be seeing here, this is a program called REPL. It's just used to write Python code on the internet. And here's my code. It looks a lot more complicated because it's not as easy to read as pseudocode. And that's kind of the point of pseudocode. It's a bit easier to understand and read. But my real code starts looking a bit more complicated. But what's happening here is the user enters the barcode, goes in there, and then we start getting our orange sum and our blue sum. And you can see we're adding up the different numbers from the barcode that the user entered. They go into the sum. And then we do a few more calculations to get the orange digit, the blue digit, the pink digit, the brown digit, and then the final number according to the algorithm that we used. And it'll tell us if we got it right. So do a quick run of this, and the program asks me to enter the barcode. Now I'm just going to use the one from the tomatoes. So my tomato code, cherry tomatoes, is 9300 633, 607 333. And remember that last 3 there is the checksum, so it should come out to get that. So when I run that program, it does all the maths. The final number should be 3. Yes, it is, so the barcode scanned correctly. So that's just a little example there. And you can try that other link later on if you like to see how it can also be done with Scratch. Just briefly, I wanted to mention a couple of other things you could do in a secondary setting. One of the simplest things coders often do is a temperature converter. A lot of Digitech teachers are also maths teachers, so sometimes maths can dominate the kind of examples that students do in Digitech, and it doesn't have to. And next week we'll be talking about literacy and English and stuff, so make sure you come in for that one. Hailstone numbers, which is one of these conjectures, one of these things that we can't say for sure if it's actually true, but it seems to be. And you can use some code to do one of these hailstone sequences. They're supposed to always end up with 1 at the end, but you can, you can use code to see what happens. And they get quite long, so it's pretty hard to do it by hand, but that's what computers are perfect for. When you put the algorithm in, you can try much larger sequences. Or you could do something like a number guessing game. And if you look at one of our previous webinars, we talk about that one. And finally, that's the link to our resource doc we mentioned at the beginning. So this is the end of the first section of the webinar, but that doc there contains resources that we've talked about and tools that we've talked about in this webinar. So feel free to put that into your browser now if you'd like to access that resource document. I just wanted to highlight a couple of things relevant to what we've just talked about. You'll see there 10 lessons for algorithmic thinking that were produced by MAV, the Maths Association of Victoria. That's terrific, and MAV do some really great stuff on their website. So it's worth having a look. They've tried to do one for every single year level. And at the Digital Technologies Hub, you can filter the lessons by whether they're connected to maths or not. So that's another great way to find maths-related Digitech lessons.
So now we've got another little Minty question that we want to ask you, and I want us to share with each other examples of ways that you are already using algorithms in your mathematics teaching. Now, if you've just come on, this is an interactive part of the session, and if you just go to menti.com and then pop in the code 388742, then this slide should come up, and then you can think about different ways and share different ways that you're already using algorithms in your mathematics teaching.
So, yeah, basically this is one where you can just type in an answer rather than a vote. And yeah, you might be thinking, after we've just talked about algorithms as processes, maybe some of the processes that you do with students in a maths class. If you're doing this on your phone, it might be a bit slow to type. I might put one in to help get us started.
I'm putting one in too. Oh, here we go.
Geometry, yeah, we'll be getting onto geometry later too. Everything they know about the number 12, that's cool. Finding things on a map. Identifying factors. Yeah, that's a process, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a good one.
Solving lattice multiplication.
Yeah, I think it's so important to talk about the strategies and how many ones we use. Yeah, absolutely.
I know that the people at MAV were really excited about this because, yeah, that's what they were saying too. Like, that's good maths teaching to teach the kids about strategies.
I think my favorite one is, oh, what strategy did you use to solve that problem? My brain. And I was like, your brain is not a strategy. You need to think of a different way. And so it was really great to see those students that were quite already switched on with maths, but what I did find is that they didn't have the vocab to be able to articulate the strategies. So it was really great that even though, you know, that they were quite quick with their maths, by the end of the year, what they had developed is all of this rich mathematics language that they had. And so they'd be saying things like, oh, I use double facts and then numbers to 10 and then adding 10 plus 1. And it was really, and this was in a grade 1-2 class as well.
Mm. Just give you another maybe 30 seconds or so, see if anyone wants to add anything else.
Already doing in the classroom as well that you just, don't actually realize that you're already doing this algorithm thinking.
Okay, so that process of collecting data and then presenting it, we'll actually be talking about that too towards the end of this webinar. But yeah, there's certainly a process involved with that.
Yep.
All right. Geometry. I think we just wanted the heading there, so let's keep going.
Oh, so the example then that we would be using in geometry is creating shapes with a geoboard. Now, if you don't have access to a geoboard or you find some of those plastic pegs have broken, I actually did a quick Google search and found geoboard template. And there's so many free PDF files that you can actually have. So I used to be the laminating queen at my old school. So I would just print out geoboard templates and then get them, laminate them and get them to draw on them for the day. And so what they would then do is create or draw shapes within the geoboard, and I've just created that one just using lines in a Word document. And as they've drawn the shape, to write out instructions that they use to make that shape. Now, as an introduction part of the lesson, what you might find, especially in those junior year levels, that how do you talk about when you're doing the movement from one to another? And you don't really want to bring in, especially with the shape that I've got on here, is almost like you don't want to start bringing in 45-degree angles. And so you might want to say, when you want to get to one point to another, that you might say diagonally. And then as a classroom, you might come up with the right type of language to suit the year level that you're teaching. The idea then is that you might want to swap those instructions with another partner and see if they're able to read those instructions and create the same shape. I did a lot of work when it was writing instructions and then giving them to someone else, and it constantly came up with that the instructions weren't clear at different points. And so it wasn't about pinpointing who had done the wrong instructions, but it was more about how important it is to give explicit instructions where what you think is happening on the page might be completely different interpretation from your partner as well. It was a really great way to link it with location, especially when you are talking about turns. I know that turning came into, I think it was the grade 2 level from memory. So it was a really great way to link in left and right, but also be teaching shape as well. If you're up to the stage where you would like to do some of the block coding and then switch it from a written activity onto a computerized and digitized one, then you could then test their instructions that they've made in a platform like Scratch. Now, if they haven't used Scratch before, or if you do have access to iPads, Scratch Junior is also a really good one to have as well, because that's then just the same idea with, but it's only really symbols and things like that. So, you know, even though it is called Scratch Junior, they can still get quite a lot out of that. And so this particular one here is when you're writing to create a square, and you can see that this particular instructions that I've chosen looks at the repetition. So that's a perfect way to bring in iteration if you're at that stage, starting it out with your grade 5s and 6s as well.
For the secondaries, I thought I'd build on that previous example that Catherine had that she'd done in Scratch. And I wanted to use a platform called REPL. REPL is really, I will be showing later a couple of examples of ready-made sort of learning tools, but REPL is more of an open tool where you just get a blank page and you just start programming. So I'll just bring one up now, and we're going to use the turtle or the pen, and we're going to focus a little more about how we can generalize, because that's a really useful computational thinking skill. So if we switch over to REPL, this is what REPL looks like when you first start it up. And I'm going to click here, New REPL. You do have to have an account when you get started. And the one I'm going to pick here is called Python with Turtle. That says Turtle there. And it gives me a weird name. I'm just going to say My Program, which is a terrible name for a program, but we're just going to call it that for now. Oh, so here we go. Yep. So we've got the code will be on the left here. Our little turtle or our pen will move around up here. So if we're going to draw something, I just have to put in a line to import the turtle, but then I can just say turtle dot forward 50. And when I run that, we see the turtle moving to the right 50. And then I might say, okay, the next stage in my program, I want it to turn right after that. So we run again, the turtle moves and then turns right. So if we wanted to complete a square, we could copy and paste like that. So now we've got forward, right, forward, right, forward, right, forward, right. And that would have obviously get us our square. But as programmers, we know that that's not the best way to code. Sometimes copy and paste is not a good idea. We'd be better off making a loop. Now, I'm not going to take you through the basics of coding here because there isn't time. But if we were going to make a loop here, we might say for I in range 4. And now we've got a loop that will do this 4 times. So here we go, and that's our square. Now, when I was talking about generalizing, what I meant was, what if we could make a program that would do any regular polygon, not just a square, but a pentagon, a hexagon, any regular polygon, as long as we supply the number of sides. And there's a bit of maths involved here, and you could certainly take your time with the students to figure it out. What we're going to do is we're going to have a variable called number of sides. And we're going to set that to something. Now, in the case of a square, we could set that to 4, and then we could take out this one and replace it with our variable, number of sides. So now our program will do it that many times. The problem is that will work for our square, but if we wanted to do, say, a pentagon, we change this to 5, this is not going to work. We're going to just do a square with an extra side twice. As you can see, it still did 90 degrees every time. So in here is the maths we need so that it will do a pentagon instead. It's not quite the same as the equation you might do in Year 7 maths or Year 8 maths where you use the internal angles of a regular polygon. But in this case, 360 divided by number of sides will get us what we need. So if I run this now, I can do a pentagon. But here's the cool thing. I can do any side, I can do any shape now just by changing this variable. So if I want to do a septagon, I can do that. I can do a shape with 7 sides and it will nicely give me that regular polygon because I've generalized. Now the next step, of course, would be to do a function and to do it properly with a function. And that's something that you would teach perhaps in Year 7, 8 Digitech. But just to get that far, it's really teaching a lot about how we can use abstraction here. We generalize by using a variable and then using it in the same bit of code. So again, there's the link to our resources doc because we're just finishing up the geometry bit now and we've got 1 bit left to go. The Australian Computing Academy Digital Technology Challenges are a great one to have a look at. They actually do have specific ones that are all about geometry using a turtle. During the COVID situation, they have made their DT challenges and in fact everything on Grok Learning free for all Australian students. Normally, it's the years 3 to 8 that get access to the digital technology challenges for free within Australia. And you can actually monitor your kids' progress. And during the COVID thing, they've also been doing sort of web they've had people on call that you can ask for help. So it's a great resource to have a look at. So make sure you check that out in the document. And then the last section we've got is about data. And data is obviously huge for Digitech because, we're always talking about data and working with data. When the maths curriculum talks about data representation, it often means visual representation like charts and how they compare, how to use them appropriately. When the Digitech curriculum talks about data, we often see it as this process where we acquire data somehow, we record it somehow, we manipulate that data, we work with that data in order to produce information, and then we present that information. And in Digitech, we also have to be concerned with security and how we're working with that data. But it can also just mean data representation as in concepts like binary and things like that, which are also an explicit part of Digitech. So we just wanted to talk about that, the formal one there, the process of data.
So this is an activity that I helped a teacher go through, and we were looking at collecting data, and they were ready to move away from collecting data about their favorite ice cream or their football team, and wanted to actually really create an opportunity to create real data for a real purpose. At the same time, they were doing an integrated unit, a science-focused unit on plants and biology. And so what we then ended up doing was creating the data collection about the plants and thinking about where is the best place in the school to grow your plants. So normally we see, 26 of those polystyrene cups on the shelf in the classroom and all growing at the same time. And so I put the question is, well, what about if we started to grow these plants at different places, or before we started growing them, think about where the best place would be. So we then have, I have access to a bank of robotics called qubits. And so I was helping teachers go through and help them work out all of the qubits and how it all works as well. And so if you aren't up to the robotic stage yet, think about how you might be able to do this as an activity, as an unplugged one. And so what we have is, and what we use is the qubit controller, where once you do the coding on the qubit software, it all gets transferred into the qubit controller. We then were able to program it. So we had the second one on the screen there is a temperature sensor. And what you're able to do is grab the data from the temperature sensor, and then also it displayed in the LED strip. So we actually had two opportunities to talk about data and data representation in this lesson. So the first one was we coded the data. So the LED strip has 10 little lights on it. And we started the temperature at, I think it was 15 degrees, and we went all the way up to 33 degrees. And so when there were certain amounts of lights on, we had to almost create that little bit of a tally and that structure of what does each of those lights represent for us. We did have a conversation around that, there was 2 degrees in each of them as well. And would that be the best representation of the data? And what happens if you had 5 degrees and things like that? And then the next one and the very end one on the right is the light sensor. So you can put all of these and connect all of these together to create a mobile, almost like a temperature sensor and a light sensor for data gathering. And so the students then went around the school and collected the data at different times. What this here is a very, very quick snapshot of what the Qubit workshop software actually looks like. So you can see that when the Qubit button is pressed, then the light sensor data is going to be red. This even got a little bit better, is that through the Qubit software, we were actually able to graph what they were doing and the findings of the light sensor. At the time, I was actually growing some basil and, just looking at it. And unfortunately, my basil at home started to die a little bit because it wasn't getting enough sunlight in. The temperature was good, but the light wasn't there with it. What this little bar does is that there's a little graph that starts to grow as a little, just a little line that goes across the page. After the students have then collected their data, what they can do is the third little grey button on the right there, it says save as a CSV. So they've collected all of this data and then they're able to download it and create an Excel spreadsheet from it. And from that, we then created some graphs. They then, from the data they had collected over a certain amount of time, and I think we were collecting data almost at the beginning, at different times during the day, to make sure that the area that we wanted to grow our plants had enough sunlight for these plants to grow. At the very end of it, then the students then presented their findings based on the data that they had collected. Again, this is something that you might see and find connections with and do it as an unplugged activity. But if you are keen to start diving into qubits, let me know, because we do have a bank of them available for you to borrow for free as well. So I'll pop my email address in the chat afterwards, and definitely connect with me if you'd like to borrow some of these qubit robotics. And don't stress either, I will support you the whole entire way. And there's also lesson plans that are attached to this as well. So you will certainly get a lot of guidance from me. I won't just push robotics to you and say goodbye. I will be there at times to support you through it.
Unmute myself again. Last example I want to do has to do with spreadsheets, and we've done enough coding in other languages, but the power of spreadsheets is often lost on kids. Many students, they only learn sort of simple data entry, like putting in some numbers into the spreadsheet and then making a simple chart. But really the power of spreadsheets is when you can use the formulas, and even some simple formulas can get you a long way. So I just wanted to show you another quick example of doing a project with a spreadsheet. So once again, I'm just going to switch over here. So what we've got here is an empty spreadsheet. This is not Excel, this is Google Sheets. And you can see I've got 3 columns, first die, second die, and total. And what I'm going to do here is try to create a graph doing 100 rolls of 2 dice and seeing what the totals are. And those of you who've done this experiment in your class would know that 7 tends to be the most common, and you get a kind of a nice curve shape based on you know, the totals that you get for the frequency of the others. So to do this, I'm just going to double click in this cell, press equals, and I'm going to put in a little formula here. And in this case, I'm going to do rand between. And this is a nice simple function that just gives you a random number between 1 and 6 inclusive. And there's my first number. I got a 6. Lucky me. I'm going to do it again in the second one here, rand between 1 and 6. And this time I got a 3 here. And you notice that they actually re-roll every time I'd make a change to the spreadsheets. So they kind of recalculate. Now the total is just going to be this cell plus this cell, and there's our total. Now here's the clever thing about spreadsheets. Now we can select these 3 and just drag down using this corner, drag down all the way down to row 102. And now we've got all these roles that would take heaps of time to do in a classroom. It's still worth doing as an activity, of course, but if you want to get lots done quickly, spreadsheets are a great way to do that. So there's all our totals. And now all I have to do is create a graph, create a chart. Now, you can do a frequency table, and in the second tab here, I have a little, for those who want to look at it later, you can do formulas to make a frequency table so that you can make a chart. Just to save time here, I'm just going to select all of these, and I'm just going to make a histogram, just so that we can get an idea of what it's going to look like. So I've selected all of those, and now I'm going to go Insert Chart, and I'm going to choose a histogram. And you can see we've kind of got that curve shape. Obviously, the horizontal axis is not correct, and that's because I hashed and bashed with the histogram. But we have kind of got the shape we're expecting. If I refresh the spreadsheet, it does another one. That one's even a little bit closer. And if we wanted to do more, if we wanted to get an even more smooth curve, we could just do more tests. We could keep pulling this down until we have 1,000 and see how that affects things. So that's a pretty simple little example of just using some random generation in a spreadsheet to do a little experiment that you might do in a maths classroom. Obviously, you can also use code to do data analysis, and in the upper secondary, you might get onto a bit more of what we would call data science. I wanted to link you to this really cool resource. This is also in the resources. This is a video learning sequence that's up on the Digital Technologies Hub, and this is for your year 9s and 10s, really. this is a Python program that analyzes novels using some AI techniques. So he builds it up over time, and you can follow along and code it yourself. And you end up with a really neat little program that you can put in, say, Harry Potter, the book, the whole text. It looks through it, figures out, and it tries to work out who are the protagonists, who are the heroes, and who are the villains. It tries to figure that out by looking at the words in the book. There's another great little example there of a sort of a social experiment done by looking at data science of directions given in screenplays and analyzing all that data. So some really interesting things are being done with data that students can really get into.
Some of the ways that you can create and use digital technology to create spreadsheets is if you want to create picture graphs, PowerPoint or a Paint program is really good for that. What I've done in the past is I came from a school that was a one-to-one iPad, and we used Book Creator quite a lot. Any times that we wanted to create our own graphs, we got the students to take photographs of what they wanted to graph and then pop it in. Obviously, you do need to make sure that if they are going to create any of their own pictures to add their own, to create their own graphs, is that we just need to make sure that the pictures are the same size. So we don't want to have one picture is the same size as, say, two smaller pictures. So just be mindful of that. I found that that was something that came up as well. Another great kid-friendly version of spreadsheets and databases is, if you've heard of Purple Mash or Too Simple, they have a range of different platforms within their platform, and you can use that as well. I think at the moment you might have to do a little bit of digging around in investigations, but I think Too Simple is still available for you for free at the moment, up until the end of June. So if it's not free up until the end of June, I do know that they do have trials for you. So you might want to have a look at what type of platforms, if you want to start using ICT to create and collect and present data. So then the next one we've got is when we are looking at acquiring data and manipulating data and communicating information, have a think about different ways that you can do this in your classroom. So just popping in. Now, if you want to pop something in and participate in this particular one, because all of the answers will come up randomly, what I do suggest you to do is just, if you want to put something in for acquiring data, just pop a little A with a colon, and then have a think about what data, how you would acquire the data. Or if you're looking at manipulating data and putting it into maybe a spreadsheet, just pop an M with a colon there as well. And same again with communicating, how might you communicate the information that you've created. Oh, just like A, so we've got acquiring is a paper survey, absolutely. Yep, using microbits to acquire data, absolutely. Manipulating Excel, oh, I love Excel. Love a good sum all. Excel, yeah. Excel's one of those ones where it's a really popular program to use, and I think it's one of those things where you can just never be an expert, or, you know, so many different formulas. Yeah, Canva, absolutely. I really like using Canva. Got some great images that you can use for free as well. Love making infographics on Canva. Yep. Making a website, absolutely.
In the Digitech curriculum, many of the content descriptors, Padlet, yeah. Many of the content descriptors talk about, using Microsoft Forms or Google Forms. Many of the descriptors talk about collaborative, so that last step of communication, doing it collaboratively or doing it in an interactive way is even better if you can find ways to do that. Google Site, that's a good tool for website, depending on your school and how it's used.
Yep, Kahoot's a great one for acquiring data. SurveyMonkey, yeah, absolutely. SurveyMonkey is a good one to do across the board as well.
Just another 30 seconds on this, and then I think we've got one slide left to go. So we're going to finish just on time.
Oh.
ABS website, of course. So you could also acquire data from a data repository. So that would be secondary data. Yeah. And ABS, you know, Bureau of Meteorology, there's actually lots of great sites out there. Some of them are kid-friendly as well, where you can get secondary data.
Yeah, absolutely.
Interview and questionnaire there. Yep, Bureau of Meteorology.
Yeah.
Plickers. Thanks, Megan. Plickers. Oh, using a survey on your own learning management system. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So we just did a little, these are not specific names of tools, but these are types of tools that you might use. So you may want to refer to this later when we upload the slide pack. But these are all different ways that you might acquire data, manipulate data, and then communicate the output.
I'm sure there's many on here that we go, oh, I've done that before, or that's something that you use as well. Sure, they're quite common. Good old poster that we've all done, I'm sure, many a times.
And there's that link again to our resource doc, just in case you missed it first time. So please feel free to access that before the end of the session. And as I said, we will upload this slideshow as well when we upload the recording of the webinar. But at this stage, we just want to say thank you, and we will hang about. We're at the end of the session, but we will hang about if you did want to ask us any questions as well. But thanks to Catherine for your participation, and thanks to everyone else who's been helping out behind the scenes.